Good morning and welcome to Rising. Thanks so much for tuning in. We've got another excellent show for you today. Two great guests. We'll be hearing from Aaron Mate about the Russiagate investigation and also Richard Hanania on why he thinks the U.S. should pursue buying Greenland. I'm here with Niall as per usual. Nice to see you, my friend.
Great to see you, Robbie. Another fun-filled day, beckoning with all sorts of news to cover, so let's not waste any time. What is on your radar?
Well, a new era is dawning at Meta. CEO Mark Zuckerberg announced on Tuesday that third-party fact-checking organizations, on Monday rather, would no longer have the power to suppress disfavored speech on Facebook, a major positive step toward restoring free expression and robust debate on the platform. In his video announcing these changes, Zuckerberg conceded that moderators working at his social media properties, Facebook and Instagram, felt pressured after Donald Trump's 2016 win to address mainstream media concerns about the spread of alleged misinformation online. He now believes that their efforts to fix this supposed issue caused more problems than they solved. After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote non-stop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy, says Zuckerberg. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth, but the fact-checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the U.S. That is from Mark Zuckerberg. Wow. He also detailed plans to scrap the platform's deprioritization of political topics and rein in automatic filters, a category of moderation that he says is prone to error. It means we're going to catch less bad stuff, he says, but we'll also reduce the number of innocent people's posts and accounts that we accidentally take down. Again, wow, these changes are wildly positive in my view. It's also heartening that Zuckerberg seems to understand precisely what has gone wrong and why. Now, the company made attempts to satisfy both mainstream media institutions and even government agencies, particularly when it came to controversial political topics like COVID-19. What moderators soon discovered is that this is impossible. There's no end to the amount of speech suppression that is desired by censorship-inclined entities. Politicians in both parties dragged Zuckerberg before the U.S. Congress to answer for a vast array of alleged sins: the end of democracy, the abuse of children, tensions with Russia, and more. What unites legacy media institutions with politically motivated speech hunters in government is a growing frustration over their own loss of control with respect to guardrails of acceptable speech. Thanks to social media, these guardrails scarcely exist. By inveighing constantly against Facebook, the old guard had hoped to reinstall them. That was the theme of my 2021 book, Tech Panic: Why We Shouldn't Fear Facebook and the Future, which attempted to shed light on how bad faith arguments against the company were providing cover for greater censorship and regulation. At the time, it was a somewhat controversial thesis. Even the political right was interested in aggressively regulating big tech or breaking up the companies entirely. 4 years later, thanks to exposés like Matt Taibbi's Twitter files and my own work on the Facebook files, the public is more aware of the role that explicit government pressure played in enacting the regime of censorship. This does not mean that tech executives were blameless with respect to the moderation decisions that ensued, but it should mean that public ire is better directed at government bureaucrats who represented the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and even the White House, which meddled in the moderation decisions just as much as any other agency under President Joe Biden. Needless to say, the third-party fact-checking organizations that will lose their clout as a result of Zuckerberg's proposed changes are not too pleased. Boo-hoo. In a New York Times article about this news, with a characteristically snarky headline, Meta says fact-checkers were the problem, fact-checkers rule that false. I love it. The Poynter Institute, one of Facebook's official fact-checking organs, protests that Meta, and Meta alone, had the power to take down content. Now, that is technically true, but the fact-checkers knew exactly what the deal was. Facebook gave them official status as approved verifiers of information and explicitly stated that moderators would remove content consistent with the verifiers' recommendations. Said recommendations were frequently misguided. In December 2021, a fact-checker called Science Feedback flagged something I had written, me, for Reason, as false information. As a result, the article's image was blurred and its distribution presumably impacted. As Science Feedback later conceded, their fact check was erroneous, my article was not. The decision was eventually reversed TV host John Stossel, a colleague of mine at Reason, had a similar experience. It is reassuring to me to hear Zuckerberg acknowledge issues with this form of fact-checking. The CEO said he plans to launch a new system in line with X's Community Notes, a crowdsourced form of verification that allows all users to weigh in, more closely mirroring the Wikipedia approach. Even the New York Times begrudgingly admits that, quote, researchers have found the program can be effective when paired with other moderation strategies. In Zuckerberg's video, he concludes by noting that the First Amendment's protections for free speech have enabled the U.S. tech sector to thrive, contrasting that with much of the rest of the world. Let's listen.
Finally, we're going to work with President Trump to push back on governments around the world that are going after American companies and pushing to censor more. The U.S. has the strongest constitutional protections for free expression in the world. Europe has an ever-increasing number of laws institutionalizing censorship and making it difficult to build anything innovative there. Latin American countries have secret courts that can order companies to quietly take things down. China has censored our apps from even working in the country. The only way that we can push back on this global trend is with the support of the US government. And that's why it's been so difficult over the past 4 years when even the US government has pushed for censorship. By going after us and other American companies, it has emboldened other governments to go even further. But now we have the opportunity to restore free expression, and I am excited to take it.
This is a key admission. The U.S. is a driver of tech innovation because its government protects free speech. Said protections are imperfect, but they are stronger here than anywhere else, and they are worth maintaining, even strengthening, so that the U.S. can continue to be the most prosperous and technologically advanced country in the world. So I am fascinated to see that Zuck really gets it, and I was fighting with a lot of conservatives actually online yesterday who were like, no forgiveness for the censorship regime. And I'm like, I don't know what your theory of social change is if you just want to stay mad at someone forever, even when they admit, you were right, and now we're going backward and reversing all the policies you didn't like. At that point, I like Tywin Lannister from Game of Thrones, when your enemies defy you, you bring them the sword and steel, but when they submit meekly, you welcome them back into the fold. That is what I recommend for these big tech executives who now understand free speech is good, First Amendment is good, go America, F
So
yeah.
it is perhaps to your credit that you take such a sunny view of human nature in general, and Mark Zuckerberg's in particular, that you assume he has had a good faith change of heart.
No, it's cynical, go ahead.
Exactly,
Go ahead,
it is
make the
cynical,
case.
it is craven, it is about catering favour with the Trump administration, and it is part of a pattern that exhibits that desire on his part, going to dinner at Mar-a-Lago, etc., etc., etc.
But was it not then, sure, but it was craven and fear-based when they fell in line with what liberal governance wanted them to do with respect to taking down more content. That was also a fear-based drive. Sorry, don't break up our company. We will take down all that speech that you don't like. Lab leak, gone. Hunter Biden laptop, gone. Don't hurt us. CDC, FBI, White House, DHS. That was craven. Now they're undoing that. Fine, for cynical reasons, whatever. My ideal amount of pressure from the government on this company to moderate content will be 0. Mm-hmm. So yes, I'm sure it's because Trump has threatened them, but it is directionally correct. I don't care what's motivating. Because what motivated the bad stuff was not good.
Trump certainly thinks it was him that threatening him that worked. He was asked about that at his Mar-a-Lago press conference yesterday and said, probably. And look, whether Mark Zuckerberg grows his hair out and wears a medallion or not, he's still a business CEO making business CEO decisions that are geared to the profits and well-being of his company. I'm not sure that he has any deep-seated convictions about freedom of speech at all. To the substance of the issue, I think that the problem with Zuckerberg's position is that he says, well, there are problems with fact-checking, therefore we'll get rid of fact-checking, barring something modelled on community notes, but we'll get rid of the idea of any kind of arbitration from people with some expertise in the area. You and other conservatives, I think, are right in saying that a lot of watchdog groups are in fact of a liberal disposition intending to push those views. But that is a flaw or a potential flaw in moderation that could be fixed if you had other people with other expertise acting as a counterweight to it. It is not, in my judgment, and this is where we differ, it's not in my judgment a reason to wave the white flag about any kind of moderation at all.
One other quick point. So in his speech, he talked about reintroducing, I think he called it civic engagement content, but I think what he means is political news, into the timeline. You know as well as I do that from about starting in 2019, 2020, there were changes to the algorithm to dampen. It used to be that there were robust political conversations and debates happening. I would share the articles I wrote for Reason or wherever else on Facebook, and my friends and other people would argue about them. You'd see them shared multiple times. It was actually a good driver of traffic to news websites. When after Facebook made this change, it was apocalyptic for a lot of us in the industry. It has the thinking being that dampening that stuff would improve the user experience because you'd have more non-political discussion and engagement with friends and family. That has not panned out whatsoever. I check Facebook every now and then. I don't use it nearly as much as I do X and Instagram. I was just scrolling yesterday. It's just like it's nothing from people I even know. It's mostly ads or like facts about entertainment properties I like. It's mush. It's nothing. So going back to the way things were on that front too, I think would be a welcome change for people who still use Facebook.
I agree. I think it has deteriorated a lot. I use it much less than I used to, and I'm significantly older than you are. It has become this older person's thing, and I don't use it very much at all for part of the reasons you say. There's almost no news even from friends on it, and even some of the entertainment-related news is just obviously wrong. It's just obviously like clickbait saying, oh, here, look at this photo of like, I don't know, Bob Dylan in 19, and it's just like something's factually wrong.
I don't know if it's AI generated. It's on some kind of level of not a real human making it. Exactly. I don't know exactly how it has become the case that the timeline is just that, but it's not good at all. All right, still to come on Rising Day, lots of great content. As I said, 2 terrific interviews. You won't want to miss them. Stay tuned. We'll be back in just a minute. Hell may have frozen over in the first bill passed by the new GOP-led House. 48 Democrats sided with the Republicans to pass a stricter immigration bill. The newly elected Democratic senator from Arizona, Ruben Gallego, offered to be a co-sponsor. It's the Laken Riley bill, named after the slain 22-year-old nursing student killed by an undocumented Venezuelan migrant last February.
Remember, Riley became a rallying cry for Donald Trump and for mass deportation during his campaign.
Right here in Georgia, our nation was robbed of a brilliant 22-year-old nursing student, the best everything, most respected person, beautiful person, Laken Riley. I've also met with the wonderful family of Laken Riley. Kamala Harris let in the illegal alien animal who murdered Laken. This monster was in Border Patrol custody, under very strong custody. They didn't want to let him go. But under Kamala's policies, he was set free.
Riley was jogging around the University of Georgia campus when she was raped and murdered by Jose Ibarra, an undocumented immigrant from Venezuela. He had been previously arrested but was never detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
If the bill passes the Senate, the feds would now have to detain illegal immigrants found guilty of robberies, theft, and even shoplifting. It also lets states sue the Department of Homeland Security if people are harmed by illegal immigration. The Dems that were supporting the Laken Riley bill challenged their colleagues.
Let's see what Democratic Senator John Fetterman had to say.
If you're here illegally and you're committing crimes and those things, I don't know why anybody thinks that it's controversial that they all need to go.
Do you think that this was one of, if not the biggest issue for this election?
Well, I think if we can't, there's 47 of us in the Senate, and if we can't pull up with 7 votes, if we can't get at least 7 out of 47, and if we can't, then that's the reason why we lost. That's one of them. That's one of why we lost.
Newly sworn-in Democratic Senator Ruben Gallego posted, quote, "Not only am I voting yes on the Laken Riley Act, I'm co-sponsoring the bill. Arizonans know better than most the real consequences of today's border crisis. We must give law enforcement the means to take action to prevent tragedies like what occurred to Laken Riley." So we have an immigration bill passing. This effectively forces law enforcement officials to detain and to keep detained illegal immigrants who commit crimes other than just the immigration status crime. This is exactly the narrowly focused on otherwise criminal behavior sort of approach that I think does have merit, would address a lot of the public's concern with crime being committed by illegal immigrants without doing a kind of, obviously door-to-door mass deportation of otherwise law-abiding people that would be very costly and disruptive, but a narrow focus on, why are people who already they violated the crime of immigration. Now, for my mind, that's not enough to necessarily be thrown in prison or deported, but you have some underlying basis that they have committed a crime, and now they also commit an additional crime of, I don't care if it's shoplifting, if it's a crime, and then they're going to be free. That's what really annoys people, and so addressing that seems like good politics and good policy to me.
To the point of it being good politics, I think it's quite heartening in a way to see Ruben Gallego, who while he was a House member was considered a fairly progressive member of the Democratic Party, back in this now as a newly elected senator. And I think that's a recognition of two things. One is the politics of it, where the immigration issue has plainly been damaging for Democrats in a lot of ways. But also, it does just go to a basic issue of fairness or justice. Despite being an immigrant myself, I have very limited patience for some of the most left-wing arguments that are made on immigration, which often, it seems to me, holds that enforcing the immigration laws would be inconvenient for illegal immigrants and therefore shouldn't be done. And I don't see how you can fairly make that argument. Now, that does not mean that particularly in the case of the Dreamers, I think that is a very different category, because then you're talking about people who have been brought to the United States as children. We do not typically hold children culpable for the actions of their parents, be they immigrants or native-born Americans, or, that just isn't something that happens. In the Laken Riley case was appalling, and the man who murdered her was arrested for a shoplifting offence, I believe about 4 months before the murder, and obviously his name was run through databases. No matches came up. He was then released. It's just very difficult from any fair-minded moral perspective to defend that, and I think it is telling that Ruben Gallego and Fetterman's are more, I have criticisms of Fetterman and other issues, but I do think that the argument he makes here is very difficult to rebut.
Yeah, you can only imagine the family's agony in a case like this, where someone violates immigration law and then commits an additional crime of shoplifting and then is still out there, still free, and then commits rape and murder. And they can't help but ask, well, if there had been enforcement of the immigration law or of the additional criminal law, this would not have happened. And so you can't escape feeling their agony over that being the case and other families being in that situation. Certainly, I want to make it easier for people to come here legally if they're going to work, if they're going to contribute meaningfully to the country, without having to wait years and years and years. The system for coming in is broken. The asylum system is broken and swamped and is now having to process a lot of people who ought not to be coming in that way. But we need to change it for sure. But in the meantime, we need border enforcement, and we need to enforce the immigration laws against people who are committing violent crimes against citizens. You will lose the trust of the people, to your point, which is why Democrats have clearly seen this, why you have people like Ruben Gallego and John Fetterman and others saying that, yes, we are listening to the people. They want more enforcement of immigration issues in at least this case, and this case. And so I'm glad to see where that's going to happen.
Yeah, one point that I would add to this particular bill, which I think may be a little more problematic across the board, is this idea which we mentioned. It empowers state attorney generals to sue the government more easily over immigration policy. I get the basic rationale for that. If someone in a particular state is damaged or suffers injury, then you could argue that it is fair for that state to sue. What I would be a little worried about is a scenario where immigration policy of whatever type just gets constantly bogged down in legal challenges. It has been traditionally fairly uncontroversial that it is the federal government that sets immigration policy. Yeah. And of course, people argue very vociferously as to whether that policy is right or not. But I'm dubious about that element of this bill.
I think it should be easier for private citizens to sue the government. There are legal doctrines right now in place that make it very, very hard to sue the qualified immunity. There's a presumption of goodwill that the government has baked into the law, so it's very hard for individuals to sue the government for personally damaging them or harming them. I think that's wrong. I would like to get rid of those rules, so it is easier to sue the government. But this would be a case of a state government suing the federal government, or that I agree with you is a little dicier, and I'm also concerned about trying to quantify the harms. Like in this case, the harm is very clear. A woman was murdered, and sure, you can say that was because of lax enforcement of immigration policies, but it's not clear. It seems, I think the law would allow itself toward less concrete examples of harms from immigration, and suing on that basis might not be the best use of states' time.
Much more so. I was actually quite startled because I looked at the text of the bill, and it allows a lawsuit to be mounted on the basis of any injury that can be perceived to have cost more than $100. I don't know what that basically allows everything to be claimed as a harm or a direct injury caused by immigration policy. So I do worry that it's just setting up this case where nothing ever happens with immigration because you are in a constant battle between either a conservative federal government being sued by liberal-leaning states or the opposite.
Stick around, more Rising right after this. Is the FBI hiding a very important question surrounding its second investigation into then-President Donald Trump in 2017, otherwise known as Russiagate?
Journalist Aaron Maté believes so. When he requested documents from the FBI about Russiagate, the FBI redacted the reasons why they suspected that Trump was a Russian agent. That is the basis for Aaron's latest piece for Real Clear Investigations. It's titled, "FBI is Still Hiding Details of Russiagate, Newly Released Document Shows."
That suspicion was essentially the entire basis for opening the probe in the first place, Maté writes. While the original Trump-Russia investigation has been discredited, the public remains in the dark about why the FBI launched a follow-up counterintelligence probe that targeted Trump while he was newly in the White House and what ends it took to pursue it. Joining us now to discuss this is Aaron Maté himself. Aaron, welcome back to Rising. Nice to see you.
Good to be here.
So what have you uncovered with respect to why this investigation came into being in the first place?
Well, the FBI has offered no detail as to why it felt it had sufficient grounds to open up an investigation of a sitting president as a Russian agent. That was the basis for this investigation, which is launched in May 2017. And just to clarify for people, because it's a little confusing, so you have already Crossfire Hurricane, which was the initial Trump-Russia inquiry. This is the FBI on July 31st, 2016, during the presidential campaign, deciding based on a really vague tip about George Papadopoulos, a low-level Trump campaign volunteer, that they had grounds to investigate the Trump campaign for possibly conspiring with Russia. And after Trump gets elected in May 2017, this is now Trump's fourth month in office, Andrew McCabe, who's then the deputy director of the FBI, decides, you know what? We also have ground to not only be investigating Trump circle for ties to Russia, let's investigate the president personally himself as an agent of Russia. And that's what this investigation was. Now, in the document that I got, which is the opening communication which launched this investigation, it claims that there is a factual basis to launch this probe, but that factual basis is entirely redacted, which means that more than 7 years later, we still do not know why the FBI thought that it was appropriate to investigate a sitting president in the White House for being an agent of Russia. All we have are the public statements that McCabe has made. And what he said in public is that basically because Trump had fired Jim Comey just days earlier, that made him wonder what Trump has to hide. And why would Trump go ahead and fire Jim Comey if he wasn't working on behalf of Russia? And that, in McCabe's view, was sufficient predication. We've also gotten some details in news reports. So, for example, in January 2019, the New York Times first reported that the FBI had opened up the second probe of Trump, and they reported that the Steele dossier, which is the collection of Hillary Clinton-funded conspiracy theories, that was among the factors that fueled the FBI's concerns. And to that point, we already know from previous reporting, including by my colleague Paul Sperry at Real Clear, that right before McCabe opened up this counterintelligence probe of Trump in May 2017, the FBI re-engaged Christopher Steele after not talking to him for many months because he had previously been terminated as a source because he was blabbing his mouth to the media. But then McCabe decides, because he wants to build this new probe of Trump as a Russian agent, let's bring Christopher Steele back in. So they spoke to Steele. And I think it was, basically that Christopher Steele's ludicrous dossier, the fact that Trump had fired Comey, and McCabe in his head can't imagine why Trump would do that, except for the possibility that he was a Russian agent and was trying to cover something up, that's why he felt this was sufficient grounds. In my opinion, this wouldn't be grounds to, open up an investigation of anybody, let alone a sitting president of the U.S. It just underscores how ridiculous Russiagate was and how so many years later, we still don't know so many of the critical details.
I think it can be hard to tell whether information is being redacted because the authorities are genuinely trying to keep back something that is damaging or makes them look bad, or that they are redacting information because that is common standard practice. They would redact information even when there's nothing damaging because they're just so secretive and inclined to do it. So it can look malicious even if it's not. Now, it might very well be malicious in this case. Is there going to be an appetite or an interest in exploring perhaps some of these lines of inquiry you are exploring now that Republicans have control of Congress and a supportive president?
Well, Trump has vowed to reform the national security state, to end the overreach of agencies like the FBI. He's appointed someone to head the FBI, Kash Patel, who was very critical of the Trump-Russia investigation and he helped expose the fact that the FBI was relying on the Steele dossier to get surveillance warrants on Trump campaign volunteer Carter Page and lying about it. And that's why, by the way, a lot of Democrats, including Adam Schiff, hate Kash Patel and don't want to see him confirmed to be the director of the FBI. So it'll be up to the Trump team how much sunlight they want to give on the story. But given the damage it's caused, recall, it's easy to forget it now, but at the height of this Trump-Russia conspiracy theory was all-consuming. Democrats who were watching MSNBC and listening to people like Adam Schiff, they were convinced that this was going to do Trump in, that Robert Mueller was going to uncover the secret Trump-Russia conspiracy. Those of us who pushed back on it were marginalized and dismissed as being, Putin or Trump apologists. But now, at this point now, it's been so discredited that very few people defend the Russia investigation anymore. And the fact that the FBI still feels compelled to hide critical details, including why they launched a counterintelligence probe of Trump while he was sitting in the White House, I would hope would compel people to demand more answers and more scrutiny of these decisions.
Yeah, it totally consumed the news cycle for years. Various Russian actions, Russian involvement with the Trump campaign, Russian actions on social media companies being described as the decisive factor in spinning this tale about why Trump won. That was clearly something that I think a lot of mainstream media institutions and actually the Democratic Party itself internalized, that this was why, now we're going back 8 years, Hillary Clinton lost. That seemed to be the message that she took away from it. Do you think that negatively impacted the Democrats' ability to campaign effectively, that they were so hung up on this being the explanation for why Trump won, that they didn't have to do any kind of soul searching about their messaging or the issues they run on or any of those sorts of things?
Well, yeah. As someone who was not a big fan of Donald Trump, this was one of the many reasons why I was critical of Russiagate. The first reason was simply that it was just factually completely baseless. And as journalists, we're supposed to look at the facts, not our partisan affiliations. And that was a major reason why Russiagate took off, is because a lot of journalists put facts to the side and went with their partisan hackery, basically. And that's why Russiagate was allowed to be the thing that it was, because journalists simply weren't doing their jobs. But politically, one of the reasons why I was against it on a political basis was not only the fact that he was basically criminalizing diplomacy with Russia, which I thought was a bad idea. I mean, I think Trump was right when he said we should have good relations with a rival nuclear power. The world's a more dangerous place if we don't, in my opinion. But also, politically, I couldn't think of a bigger gift to Donald Trump and the Republicans. Because if you're Trump in the White House, what more would you want than have your opposition, rather than being organized around policies that, might be better alternatives to Trump's, or, being critical of Trump's policies, being organized around a dumb conspiracy theory, literally the stupidest conspiracy theory I've ever seen in my lifetime. This idea that the president of the United States was elected based on a sprawling conspiracy with the Russian government. And just to keep him in line, the Kremlin was also blackmailing Trump with a P-tape, which was literally what most Democratic pundits in the media were believing and promoting, and many of the people in their audience who didn't have the time to go through all the facts were led to believe. I mean, it's a huge gift to Trump. So yes, of course, this hurt the Democrats. Rather than becoming, I think, a party that was actually anti-establishment, going in the direction of someone like Bernie Sanders, who I think would have appealed to many Trump voters back in 2016, they doubled down on the Clinton wing of the party by embracing a literal Clinton-funded conspiracy theory, because that's what it was. It was a Clinton campaign that paid for Christopher Steele, and it was the FBI that covered up the fact it was relying on his dossier. And by the way, there's so much more to learn. Speaking of the Clinton campaign paying for Russiagate claims relied on by the FBI, the Clinton campaign also hired a firm called CrowdStrike, which was the entity that first accused Russia of hacking the DNC, which ultimately led to the claims that Russia hacked the DNC and gave those emails to WikiLeaks. Now, this claim originates with CrowdStrike, which is working for the Clinton campaign. And now we know from reporting that has come out, I've done a lot of this, that the FBI was relying on CrowdStrike's work. So just as it was relying on Christopher Steele's conspiracy theories, which were paid for by the Clinton campaign, it was also relying on another Clinton campaign contractor, CrowdStrike, to lodge its allegations that Russia hacked the DNC. And that was the foundational allegation of Russiagate. And I've tried through FOIA to get the FBI to release the documents it used from CrowdStrike, including CrowdStrike's reports, to make its allegations that Russia hacked the DNC, even after CrowdStrike's own CEO privately admitted to Congress that we actually have no evidence of Russian hacking. But yet the FBI refuses to release the CrowdStrike reports. And that's a part of the story where we still do not know a lot of information. So if we want to have answers, we want to get to the bottom of what happened in Russiagate, that's another place where we could have scrutiny under this new administration, is to what extent did the FBI rely on the work of a Clinton-funded contractor to lodge the foundational allegation that Russia hacked the DNC.
Aaron Mate, thank you so much for coming on to talk about that. Fascinating stuff. Great reporting, as always.
Thanks for having me.
Some good news and some bad news for Donald Trump. Attorney General Merrick Garland will release documents pertaining to Special Counsel Jack Smith's report dealing with Donald Trump's alleged plans to subvert the transfer of power, but he will withhold the Mar-a-Lago report while the president-elect's two co-defendants, Carlos Oliveira and Walt Nauta, still face trial. Details are developing, but Garland's filing to withhold the classified documents report almost certainly means the public will never see it. With respect to the hush money case, Trump has fared worse. A New York appellate court declined to halt criminal sentencing. This would mean he would return to the White House as a felon. Trump's lawyers have filed a motion with the Supreme Court to postpone the sentencing, citing its rulings giving presidents broad immunity from criminal prosecution.
The president-elect applauded Judge Aileen Cannon's decision to stop Jack Smith from releasing his findings on the classified documents. Let's watch what the president-elect said at Mar-a-Lago yesterday.
Because it was a fake case against a political opponent. They thought they were going to use this to beat me. So what you're saying is, I'm just hearing that they're not allowed to issue the report. So if they're not allowed to issue the report, that's the way it should be. Because he was thrown off the case in disgrace. Why should he be allowed to write a fake report? It'll only be a fake report. That's great news.
Now, Cannon said that Smith could not release his findings outside the Justice Department until a federal appeals court in Atlanta weighed in. The injunction is expected to last 3 days. So some news on Trump's various legal matters, none of which obviously are going to prevent him from becoming president, but he does not want to be sentenced for the hush money case, has argued that the Supreme Court in its decision granted broad immunity, and he is about to take office, so we will see if that matters to anyone.
Well, let's take up that point about the hush money case. We'll get to the Mar-a-Lago thing and the Jack Smith reports in a second. In relation to the hush money case, it is true that his team is making the argument about presidential immunity. They're making that argument about a case where the vast majority of the actions were when he was not president, when the trial occurred when he was not president, and now when the sentencing is
and
going to
the verdict
when
occurred
he's not
when he was
the
not
verdict
president,
occurred
yes.
when he was not president. So how you make that argument that he should be somehow immunized from all of that because of presidential immunity is not at all clear to me. I think it's a very, very weak argument, and I think it is part of the general pattern of Trump's team simply trying to push back on any effort to hold him legally accountable. It was obviously the only one of the 4 criminal indictments he faced that in fact proceeded to trial before he won the election.
Well, it's a weak case. It was, I would argue, a weak case Trump is making to defend himself. It was a weak prosecution, I would say, in the first place, of a not particularly significant financial issue. The flagging of this payment as a campaign contribution being the reason it got him in trouble. Not being a very serious issue to bring a criminal case against a president for the first time in history. But as you said, that is the one that they actually were able to bring to trial, unlike the Jack Smith case, unlike the Georgia case, which is now mired in Fani Willis's alleged unethical conduct, has totally tanked what was, in my view, by far the most compelling case against Donald Trump because of the unique nature of the Georgia law, allowing for trying this as a criminal conspiracy and charging a bunch of Trump associates who you can more, I would argue, clearly demonstrate took not just words, not just said things the way that Trump said things, but took actually actions, tried to hold fake meetings, tried to organize an actual
Fake slate of
actions being taken for which they were going to also be able to loop Trump into that, and it was going to be very damaging for him. Coming not to fruition because of Fani Willis.
I certainly think the Georgia case was much stronger than that one case that did actually proceed to trial and earn him his conviction on 34 counts. I think I think that the expenses in the hush money case were misleadingly filed, although you could make an argument that they were legal expenses to Michael Cohen for legal services. But to the point about the strength of the various cases against Trump, what I find frustrating about the suppression of this Mar-a-Lago report is that I in fact thought that was the strongest case, less about the documents, though that was bad enough, these sensitive documents being in ballrooms and bathrooms at Mar-a-Lago. The reason I thought that was the strongest case was there was a charge of obstruction of justice in that case, and if Trump's conduct was as alleged, it was absolutely textbook obstruction of justice. Him being subpoenaed to return documents and allegedly conspiring with others to conceal those documents, including allegedly from his own lawyer. Now, maybe he would have argued, had it come to trial, that none of that happened, or maybe he would have argued that it was a some way fake case. I didn't find it a fake case at all. I found it extremely compelling on the obstruction charge.
It was. I agree with you that it was compelling. My difficulty with that case, and yes, he should have just given back the documents and then he would have invited no legal jeopardy. However, I've complained about this already on the show today, the knee-jerk overclassification of everything that the government does. I mean, being in possession of documents you are technically not supposed to have is a problem that political figures in both parties, this happened to Mike Pence and Joe Biden himself. Now, they gave back the documents, and that's what Trump should have done. But I just can't, I guess I couldn't work myself up into a fervor over Donald Trump having had these documents and the government saying, no, you can't have them because we classified them this way, and him saying, no, I could have declassified them.
But,
well, you didn't declassify them. I understand from a legal perspective why it was a pretty open and shut case. From a philosophical and moral perspective, I did not care.
But I don't think it
just did
really
not care.
is a case about overclassification in the obstruction element. Yes, there is the element of the case that deals with the documents, but the point of the acid test I have always felt for Trump-related legal cases is, would a private or non-prominent citizen be prosecuted for the same acts? Now, that's why I think the hush money case is probably Trump's strongest argument, that a normal citizen would not have been prosecuted for that. In relation to the Mar-a-Lago case, the point of it is, if you or I are subpoenaed to produce documents, and we possess those documents and conspire with others to conceal them or simply conceal them ourselves, that is on its face a criminal offence. And whether they should or shouldn't have been classified isn't the point. The point is a legal subpoena was issued, which he then allegedly tried to avoid in the most egregious fashion possible. You or I would go to jail for that.
Well, you're right, but if that happened to you or I, if it happened to me, I would certainly, because if it happened to you, I would probably say, okay, you should have given back the documents, but what are these documents and why does the government have this need? I would still be considering violating, the government has so many ways to go after you for violating a technical and procedural crime in the course of pursuing you for some other matter. This is, Martha Stewart didn't actually go to prison for defrauding anyone. She went to prison for trying to argue her innocence in the face of these efforts to ensnare her. This happens time and time again. In the course of mounting your defense, your perjury or obstruction of justice or misleading investigators, and law enforcement has every tool at their disposal to get you that way. And so, no, I do like to consider how significant I think the underlying criminal aspect is, not just your conduct in how you related to the authorities in the moment. But you're right, technically, yes, he appears to have violated that crime, as would anyone else who defied a subpoena in that way. That's not a good idea.
It's a serious offence with a very long sentence attached.
Well, yes, yeah. I mean, but that's not necessarily good that we throw the book at people. That we have a very comprehensive justice system I don't love putting people in prison for long times over.
No,
yes.
to your credit, but that argument is not typically made by conservatives.
It's made by me and the ACLU.
But I mean, it's not generally made by the MAGA people if some unfortunate person is jailed for some.
Well, they've learned a lot more about this kind of thing and how this
they do not. I don't know that they extend it any further than Trump and his allies.
Well, they should.
Well, they should. I agree. At least we found agreement in the end.
Indeed. More Rising right after this. From sea to shining sea and beyond, the idea that the beautiful island of Greenland could in fact become part of the United States is starting to sound more and more serious.
President-elect Donald Trump signaled yesterday at a press conference that he may even use the military in pursuit of that goal. Let's watch.
We need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time, long before I even ran. I mean, people have been talking about it for a long time. You have approximately 45,000 people there. People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it.
Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., paid a visit to the island yesterday.
Now, some may be wondering whether acquiring Greenland, would in fact be worth it.
Author and political commentator Richard Hanania seems to think so, though, to be clear, he doesn't support using military force.
In a new Substack piece titled, "Should America Buy Greenland?" Hanania writes, "You may say I'm a dreamer, but is this crazier than Donald Trump becoming president? There's one thing the last few years have taught us. It's that reality can be a lot more hilarious than we once believed possible, and many of the events that have made life more fun have been the direct result of Donald Trump and Elon Musk using their outsized voices and money to undertake projects that no one else would be bold enough to undertake." Joining us now to make the case for Greenland is Richard himself. Thank you so much for joining Rising.
Glad to be here, Robbie. Thank you.
So lay it out for us. You were supportive to some degree of the idea of acquiring Greenland, and I think I am increasingly persuaded of this as well. No, we should not seize it, obviously, using military force. I don't even think Donald Trump wants to do that. This was like a classic case of the media asking a kind of out there theoretical, philosophical thing, and because Trump just refuses to say, no, I would never do this, says, yeah, maybe, I don't know, if the situation arranged itself, and then the headline is, wow, Trump wants to deploy the military against Greenland. I don't really think that's what he was saying. But talk to us about what value this giant landmass, not as giant as the Mercator projection would suggest, but large nonetheless, would mean for the United States.
Yeah, so Greenland would overnight add 20% to our landmass. And as you mentioned, Robbie, it looks much bigger on a map. There are some maps where Greenland is bigger than Africa. So
it's like the whole
if you want
world of
American
Greenland.
children to grow up and be really proud of their country and feel like they live in a big nation, you want that to happen. And you want to give them all 2D maps because they'll think America just dominates the world. So what's the situation of Greenland? Greenland is basically a big chunk of ice. It's about 80% just a big chunk of ice that's 1.7 million square miles, goes 2 miles deep at some point. It's got 55,000 people, right? That's it. That is a small town in America. And they're basically, they don't particularly like the Danes. I mean, the polls have gone back for decades, showing that most Greenlanders support independence. Now, independence for Greenland is probably not very realistic. You have 55,000 people. They're on the top of the world. They're not close to anyone else, and they're heavily dependent on the Danes. Something like half their budget of the government, they have home rule, but half the budget comes from Denmark. So it's not really realistic that they go off on their own and become their own country. And so since they're not attached to the Danes, there's a global empire right next door where everyone is welcome, where people from all over the world have come and made better opportunities for themselves. And I don't think that selling the local population on it would be that difficult. What could we do with Greenland? I mean, I don't know. We'll figure that out later. I mean, having more land is a good thing. What I do know is America is the kind of country that's going to dream big and going to actually find a way to utilize the land and make something cool out of it, if it's given the opportunity. While I can't see no offense to Denmark, but I just can't see the relationship with Greenland progressing anywhere from here.
But hang on a second, Richard. I mean, I'm not, I don't want to be overly po-faced about this. I do see the fun or the more entertaining elements of the story, and I think you're being slightly mischievous in some of the things you're saying. But whenever you talk about America dreaming big, it's dreaming big in the sense of bringing another nation or another autonomous territory into its control. Certainly we've seen the EU or some leaders within the EU pushing back against this. I mean, I get that it's a big landmass. I get that it can, in fact, be strategically important. But we can't just go around seizing parts of the world without the acquiescence or the approval of their inhabitants, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there has to be a moral line you don't cross. There has to be the American interest, and American dreaming big has to involve a moral aspect in how we deal with the rest of the world. So what I advocate for is basically to try to get the Greenlanders on our side. Now, Don Jr. and Charlie Kirk were there the other day. I noted that if they took pictures with 50 people in Greenland, that would be the equivalent of taking a picture with 360,000 Americans, because 50 people is already 1 in 1,000 of the entire island. And so, we're at the place where basically what they say about Greenland is it's on a slow path to independence from Denmark. There's this weird situation where they don't feel part of Denmark, but they're financially dependent on them. And so, there's potential here for a deal that is beneficial for all involved. But the Danes say they don't want it at this point, even the leaders of Greenland say they don't want it. And if we try to make that case, and it's just a flat no, then I think it's a result we'll have to live with. But I think there's a possibility that with financial inducements, with a targeted propaganda is sort of a loaded term, but let's say taking our case directly to the people of Greenland, making the case for them. I don't think it's impossible that they first choose independence from Denmark, which Denmark seems historically willing to recognize if they want it, and then at that point potentially joining the United States.
You wrote in your piece effectively that size does matter, that the largeness of a country contributes to its reputation and social standing and how, I guess, basically intimidating it is. You know, we are in certainly a conflict for domination with China. I myself do not want to see these conflicts come to military conflicts that will be, you know, totally destructive for us and them and the rest of the world. We want to, you know, beat these other nations in the marketplace with economic power, with better trade relations, with peer countries that do like America and want to be allies of ours and want to profess values in accordance with the West, like free speech and free trade and free and fair elections and those kinds of things. You know, is adding to our to the literal size of our nation a part of that project.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, sometimes you'll see these comparisons. They'll say Russia's economy is about similar to Italy, or they'll say, you know, the Netherlands or some some Nordic countries together had more output in something or other than the Soviet Union. But people don't feel that. People don't feel that way. People do look at maps. They just see it as, even if you don't have the population to settle every inch of your territory, it does go into the psychological aspect. What is Russia? Russia is a country. It's got a big population, but not a huge population. It's got you know, some resources and a strong military. But I think Russia is Russia because it's huge. And I think America, if it was, you know, 1/10 the size, it wouldn't be what it is. So if you believe, like I do, that America is still the greatest hope for the world, it's still progressive in the, you know, the neutral sense of the term. It's still dynamic in a way that Europe, to a large extent, is not. Yeah, I also want American ideals to win out. And so I think that, you know, what America has sort of stumbled upon is what is the way, you know, the way that, like, basically social, economic, and technological progress ultimately leads to. You go to Europe, you go even parts of Asia or parts of Africa, they know about American politics, they know about pop culture. That's not because George W. Bush launched a war or somebody planned it this way, or the State Department is that brilliant at influencing the rest of the world. It's because we are good at producing things that people want. We have a culture that's just appealing to people. That's why people come from all over the world and assimilate into it. And I think just, you know, getting Greenland would just be a reminder of that. And it would be cool. I think, you know, it's been rare. It's been rare that we've had these sort of unified projects. Hopefully, we do it without, you know, without military force, without shedding blood, keeping everyone happy. Even the Danes, everyone will get compensated. But, you know, if all those conditions can be worked out, I think it's worth doing.
I think we're pretty much out of time, but just very quickly, Richard, I mean, to the point of American ideals, this is a country, the United States, that was obviously conceived, got its freedom from a colonial power. Aren't we just talking about a form of colonialism here, or is Greenland going to get its 2 senators and its member of the House of Representatives as well under your ideal plan?
Well, I mean, there are some parts of, you know, there are territories in the United States that are not necessarily states. Yeah, that's going to have to be negotiated. I mean, maybe it would expand democracy. I saw Colorado Governor Jared Polis the other day say, make Greenland a state, but also give us Puerto Rico and DC. And, you know, if MAGA and Elon Musk propagandize to Greenland and make it a reliable red state, maybe we can get Puerto Rico and DC, or at least one of them too. So yeah, maybe it'll heal our pre-existing divisions also.
You got to add 1 red state and 1 blue state, and expand democracy. And sounds like a Louisiana Purchase type deal for the modern era. Richard Hanania, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
The fate of TikTok is still up in the air, but time is ticking. Representatives from ByteDance will make their case to the Supreme Court Friday to try to stop this looming ban.
Some, however, like the New York Post's editorial board, are warning that letting TikTok slide could have national security implications. In a piece titled "New China Spy Revelations Show Why Trump is Wrong to Resist TikTok Ban," the board argues the following. The revelation this weekend that China was able to hack US wireless telecom networks undetected for months proves yet again that Donald Trump is dead wrong to try hindering the 2024 law. That telecom hack news shows what China will do, even knowing it'll eventually be found out. It believes any US response will be a joke.
Those telecom news hackers targeted calls and phone lines to Trump, Vice President Kamala Harris, Vice President-elect J.D. Vance, and others in their circle, according to the Wall Street Journal.
If the Supreme Court decides to move forward with the ban, ByteDance will have until January 19th to sell TikTok, or the app's life in America will end. Entrepreneur Kevin O'Leary, however, has expressed some interest in cutting a deal to save the app.
Independent journalist Glenn Greenwald took to X recently and wrote, "Trump's argument isn't that China has First Amendment rights. Nobody believes that. His argument is that a TikTok ban infringes on the free speech, free association, and free access to information rights of the 170 million Americans who voluntarily choose to use the platform." Representing the opposite perspective, Nikki Haley jumped in, writing, "If the TikTok ban is reversed with the Chinese Communist Party still in control of it, it will be the first of many wins for China." So this is a real debate, not just in American society at large, but within the Republican coalition. There are many ardent Trump supporters, conservative MAGA people who absolutely want the app banned, and there are others who are against it. I am in the more skeptical of the ban category alongside Glenn Greenwald, Rand Paul, Elon Musk,
Alexandria
Ocasio-Cortez, Tucker Carlson. It's a very interesting and eclectic gathering of people who think that basically this is even if you think it's a good idea, even if you think it's best for America if TikTok didn't exist, it's still a First Amendment issue. And exactly like Glenn put it, it's not that the Chinese party has First Amendment right, or that China has First Amendment rights. It's that the First Amendment is a restriction on the government's ability to stop you and I, the American people, from hearing things that they want to hear, or from reading things, from saying things, from consuming pieces of creative expression. And that this even if it's Chinese propaganda, it still counts. Now, the national security implications of TikTok, I think, are worth taking seriously. I do think the Chinese Communist Party is an adversary of the United States, is an adversary of global freedom, an adversary of its own people. I want to be cognizant of that, of ways their government can spy on us or obtain information about us. But then when you get into the specific details of what they're doing here, I'm not saying it's not nefarious, but like all governments are spying on people in various ways, obtaining data on people. Our government is doing that. Our government is also pressuring the American social media companies, or had, as we've discussed ad nauseum, to censor content. So if the Chinese government is doing that, it's bad, but it's no different than what we did. And so I find myself just not persuaded that the national security concerns are so overwhelmingly well established that can somehow be an exception to the First Amendment. There are exceptions and can be exceptions to the First Amendment. I'm a 99% absolutist person, but there can be exceptions. You haven't satisfied me that we've gotten there.
Yeah, I do think that there are legitimate questions as to whether the United States public should be perhaps, there should be a broader effort to educate the public about Chinese ownership and exactly what that means. Corporations in China do not have the degree of freedom from government control that American corporations have. They are very formally required to furnish information anytime the Chinese government wants it. There are legitimate concerns about the Chinese government using TikTok to stoke divisions by introducing certain material and all of that. All of that being said, I have TikTok, so it clearly hasn't got to the level where I'm terrified about the Chinese Communist Party using it against me. And I, like you and like AOC, this is a very motley crew here, but I think her view, which I largely share, is there is this focus on TikTok and the Chinese ownership, which acts to distract from the way tech corporations generally can harvest data, can have very questionable policies where our privacy is concerned, irrespective of whether they are headquartered in China or in Georgia or Texas or California.
And that kind of information that they're gathering on you, people hate when I say this, but it's just, we're not putting that genie back in the bottle. The information they're gathering has to do with you're feeding it to them. You are clicking on things, you are educating the app, the algorithm, about your preferences, about what pieces of content you like to engage in, how much time you spend looking at this versus that. They are compiling dossiers of information on you. You are assisting them in that process. It's not just like you're your private, your passwords or your things like that. It's a composite of you and your interest that you are providing them that is just by its very nature, by the function, how it works. If you're not comfortable with that, log off, delete it from your phone. To participate in the future, they're going to know things about you in that respect.
Well, first of all, how viable is it really for most people in this country to log off at this point in our technological evolution? If you cut yourself off from the digital world, you are cutting yourself off from a lot of American life in 2024.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
There are real reasons to suggest that there should, I think, be more safeguards in place as to how much information just flows to corporations without there being any check on it or any formal warning about it. I know in the real world, lots of people, including me, scroll through those warnings and go, yeah, I have to press accept here to get into the app. But I don't necessarily think that we should just take the view that, oh, well, the genie's out of the bottle, so corporations can harvest whatever they like. I do think that it is worth trying to put some kind of restrictions on that, at least in the sense of making users fully aware of the way their behavior can be tracked and that behavior can be monetized by people other than themselves.
That's fine. Remember, all these things are free. You're not paying for the service. The way the app makes money on it is advertisements that are tailored to you based on your preferences. And it is not always and necessarily pernicious for the app to recommend more correctly tailored things for you. In fact, this is often a benefit. Like if you just turn on the TV, well, now even the TV kind of knows what your preferences are because it's attached to your same internet. I don't know exactly why, but it is the case that if you Google some product, you will then often see it advertised on TV. It didn't used to be that way. You'd just see tons of commercials for it. It could be, they try to, if it's an hour of, Nickelodeon where 14-year-olds are watching, it's a lot of toy commercials and cereal commercials, so it was still sophisticated, but nowhere near as sophisticated as it is now. And if you have to watch ads, if you have to see things you might buy, I would argue it is better to see things you are more interested in than things you have no interest in. And so it's not always necessarily pernicious.
It's not necessarily pernicious, although I would say it can be quite irritating. I'm constantly surprised by how bad algorithmic advertising is. For example, anytime I buy stuff online that is, sometimes the nature of the product is that it's something you only buy once every several years. Like I bought a couch online. I was bedeviled in my internet browsing for about 3 months after by ads for couches. There is no point in the life cycle of my couch buying when I am less likely to buy a couch than a month after I've bought one. But there we go.
I agree with that, but I get advertisements for shows I might like that I might have missed on. I watch a lot of TV, Netflix, HBO, etc. I might not have heard about this show, and I see a trailer for it, and I'm like, oh, I might watch that. For clothes from brands I like, brands that are like the brands I like. Oh, this is interesting. Yes, I've had the experience. We've all had the experience of just couch. But I think in general, it can be good.
More skeptical, but anyway, there we go.
More Rising right after this.
A hairstylist who worked at Fox Sports for over 10 years is making waves. Stylist Nushin Faraji filed a lawsuit Friday alleging show host Skip Bayless made unwanted sexual advances toward her and offered her $1.5 million for sex. The lawsuit reads, quote, he would give her lingering hugs after each haircut, putting his body against her own, pressing against her breasts. He then began to kiss her on her cheeks, end quote. Faraji says she shared a cancer scare she experienced with Bayless in hopes that he would stop the alleged behavior.
Faraji also accused Fox Sports 1 executive vice president Charlie Dixon of groping her and accused host Joy Taylor of creating a hostile work environment by discriminating on the basis of race and disability. According to the lawsuit, Fox's failure to prevent harassment perpetuated a misogynistic, racist, and ableist workplace where executives and talent were allowed to physically and verbally abuse workers with impunity, end quote. Taylor appeared on her evening show Speak on Monday night just after being named a defendant in this lawsuit. The lawsuit alleges that Taylor made racially insensitive comments towards Faraji.
Sports commentator Stephen A. Smith had this to say about one of his old co-hosts.
But just like I said, I've known Jay-Z for 25 years. I can't imagine that. I've known Skip for just as long. I can't imagine it. I can't imagine it. Especially when they brought up the $1.5 million. The Skip Bayless I know has a hard time giving away $15. He's one of the cheapest people I know. That's just me. But that doesn't mean that I have any inside knowledge about any of this. I don't, and I'm not going to get involved.
So these are serious allegations that will need to be looked at. Neither you nor I are in any position whatsoever to adjudicate them here and now. It is serious, and it's certainly not in the realm of impossibility that it happened. It might have happened exactly how this hairstylist described it. Workplace things like this do happen. People have been brought to justice for similar wrongdoings. By the same token, it sounds like, if I'm understanding this correctly, because she's filed a wrongful termination lawsuit. There was a termination. People can be terminated for proper reasons and weaponize that, resort to things like this in order to get some kind of payment or settlement. So I have no idea which is the case, and the system will just have to work it out. What else can you say?
I think that we do try our best to walk a fair and fine line on these things, because neither of us wants to minimize conduct like this where it occurs. If what she alleges happened, it's a serious thing, it's an abusive, harassing thing, and it's wrong. That being said, the people named in her lawsuit, to my knowledge, have not spoken out giving their side of the story as yet. They obviously have the right to tell that side of the story. There can be false allegations or vindictive allegations. There can also be allegations that simply remain in the realm of doubt, and we can't tell for sure. Here's what struck me most of all, though, about the filing of this lawsuit and the social media reaction to it. Depressingly, in my opinion, Joy Taylor took enormous criticism for behavior on her part that isn't nearly, alleged behavior on her part, I should say, that does not nearly rise to the level of the alleged behavior of the two men involved in this lawsuit. So in Skip Bayless's case, we said in the introduction, it's the allegation that he propositioned this woman for sex and continued to make unwelcome advances. In the case of the executive, Charlie Dixon, it is alleged that he groped her. One of the reasons this has attracted so much attention is because of the salaciousness of allegations around Joy Taylor, who the plaintiff alleges was sleeping with Charlie Dixon and then subsequently sleeping with a co-host or would-be co-host, Emmanuel Acho, or Acco, I'm not sure of the pronunciation. There was enormous social media uproar complaining about her having alleged but consensual relationships with these people. Slut-shaming is not a word I typically love, but that would be how it would be described. While there seemed to me to be much less social media concern about the actual allegations of sexual harassment or assault from the men.
I take your word for that. I hadn't, frankly, seen much conversation about this in my own social media feeds to begin with. That's probably just because I'm not as sports-focused as perhaps the average user, so I didn't see that. But I fully believe you and agree that it would be a little weird for her to be in, again, if true, more trouble than Skip Bayless is, or I guess Charlie Dixon for that matter. People's private, romantic, sexual lives are of no interest to me whatsoever. All of it, who's sleeping with who, it's of interest to me in a gossipy sense, but I think it's a bad tendency for the public to be exercised about those things. If they occur in the workplace and violate a power dynamic or an employer-employee, then it is a workplace issue, and certainly people should not engage in unwanted sexual relationships or advancements or harassing with anyone, or especially with their underlings. That puts it in an even different category. So that's all wrong. People just sleeping with people, or the wrong people, or bad relation. I don't care about any of that, and we're way too. We become. It's gone back a little bit now, but at the height of Me Too, there was a kind of puritanical, not just for harassment abuse, misconduct, but just anyone sleeping with anyone in not straightforward circumstances that I found a little not good.
Yeah, and to that...
Morality in TV show co-hosts, it's not my number one issue for us, I guess.
No, I know. I mean, I think that in this case it is kind of dubious because, well, the plaintiff, to my mind, seems to have kind of incorporated Joy Taylor into this. Maybe partly to get publicity for the lawsuit itself, because Taylor isn't accused of the most serious things here. She's accused of the makeup artist, the plaintiff, and Joy Taylor were friends, and they had a falling out for unspecified reasons. And now the allegation is that Taylor mocked the makeup artist's grasp of English. I think she's Iranian-born, the plaintiff, and on some other occasion, Joy Taylor, who is black, wanted a black hairstylist to do her hair. I'm not getting into the merits and demerits of that, but I just think that the foregrounding of Taylor and the social media reaction to it seems to me to be very dubious.
Okay,
given
I am now reading the social media reaction, and it is very mean and also kind of funny, but very mean and
Yeah, so, you know. That's writing, coming to the defense of Joy Taylor.
We'll leave viewers to work that one out for themselves. More Rising right after this.
It was the picture that defined January the 6th, 2024. This moment happened after Vice President Kamala Harris administered the swearing-in of new senators. Tradition dictates cordiality with political rivals, smiling for the cameras and air kisses even when insincere. But now many are accusing Republican Senator Deb Fischer's husband of snubbing Harris when Harris reached out for a handshake. Harris had to awkwardly reel her hand back in after Fischer's husband didn't shake it.
The situation appalled author Don Winslow, who wrote on X, "It's disgraceful that Bruce Fischer, husband to incoming GOP Senator Deb Fischer, cannot muster a few seconds of class to shake the hands of VP Kamala Harris. In my opinion, the only thing Bruce showed here was that pigs don't live on farms. He's a pig."
Podcast host Brian Tyler Cohen wrote, "The husband of a Republican senator just refused to shake hands or make eye contact with Vice President Harris. The level of class you can expect from MAGA."
But others said, not so fast. Now, while some Republicans cheered on the fact that Fischer's husband snubbed her, others actually had a different take, arguing that Fischer's husband's hands were full. So as you can see from the picture, he would have had to let go of his cane to shake Harris's hand. Actress and screenwriter Colette Harrington, for instance, wrote, "The man had a cane in one hand that he clearly needs and no place to put the Bible," which does suggest, what do you suggest, that he dropped the Bible on the floor? What kind of idiot wouldn't notice this and reach in for a handshake? Media personality Eric Erickson wrote, "By the way, let's just say hypothetically that Senator Fischer's husband could have let go of the cane to shake Harris's hand and didn't. There's a long list of puff pieces from the left of those who refused to shake Trump's hand." So this was very hotly disputed on social media the other day. I did weigh in and said that it looked to me like it was not a deliberate slight because, so he has a cane, he has the Bible so that Deb Fischer can place her hand on the Bible, and then she does take the Bible so that, but then he would maybe have to either shake with his left or switch the hand his cane is in. He's an older gentleman. I would not assume it was a malicious thing. Now, it could have been malicious. People said, aha, but Robbie, he had a cane last time we did this, and he managed to shake Mike Pence's hand, and apparently there's video of him shaking, but there's also video of him shaking Joe Biden's hand when Joe Biden was the vice president presiding over this. So if it is malicious, it was not against all Democrats, but specifically against Kamala Harris. He might have just gotten older since then, and it's harder in a high-pressure we've all had embarrassing going in for the handshake or going in for the hug kind of moments, you know what I mean? And I don't like, based on very short video clips, that are often misleading, even though they don't look like they're necessarily misleading, we're lacking greater context. I, based on that, would not assert that it was done intentionally. It was maybe done intentionally. If it was done intentionally, my view is that that's not very respectful, and you should shake the hands of people on the other for the good of the nation, even if you have sincere, serious political disagreements. But it is his right to engage in some kind of protest and not do it, and I'm sure progressives would applaud a Democrat for doing that in certain circumstances with certain Republicans. So it's not something, to my mind, to get all exercised over one way or the other, but That's my take. What's yours?
My take is it is debatable what his intentions were. I do think that in addition to not shaking her hand, he appeared to be avoiding eye contact with her, which would fuel the idea that it is a snub of some kind. But look, it's not absolutely cut and dried. By her body language in reaction, I think did think it was a snub. She looked kind of slightly embarrassed or slightly taken aback by it. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe the issue was the cane, although, as you say, there have been other instances where the cane has not impeded him from shaking hands, including that of Joe Biden. If it were unintentional, then it's much ado about nothing. The man needs a cane. I don't want to mock or be in any way derisive about that. If it was intentional, I do think it is petty and small and not very helpful. I also think that this is one of those controversies where if the parties were reversed, the social media reaction and the cable news reaction would be completely the inverse of what they are. In other words, there are lots of people now saying, well, he's an older man who had a cane, where if he were a Democrat refusing to shake a Republican's hand, the world would be ending and it would be a disaster and acrimonious and disrespectful and all the rest. The same is true the opposite way around. So I think this is one of those furors that is going to be rather short-lived. If he snubbed her, he shouldn't have done that. If he needs his cane and was distracted, that's life. You know, there is a slight tendency, I think, to just take every single thing that happens as fuel to throw into the outrage furnace.
To work ourselves into permanent, hyper, overactive anger, etc., which is not healthy for us either. And so, yeah, I got a lot of engagement on this one for weighing in, perhaps too quickly on my part to say that I did not think it was a deliberate snub. Having looked at it a little bit more closely, I think it's more ambiguous than I thought it was at the time. I still can't tell one way or the other. And there are certainly some people who, if they were making it a deliberate snub, would want to make it clear that that's what it was, and then would subsequently given, like if it was Marjorie Taylor Greene or something.
Yeah, there'd be no doubt about it.
Should make sure friendly conservative media knew that it was done on purpose. He did not do that, so I don't know. I really can't tell.
There was a Republican senator, and I'm now blanking on who it was, who he wasn't especially warm to the vice president, but his daughters apparently wanted their own photo taken with her afterwards, which is kind of a nice touch and more what we want than this sort of.
Yeah, you know, I think it's good for the nation, for our Republicans and Democrats to have collegial relationships and interact with each other in basically civil ways, to shake the hand of people on the other side. I think that's good and proper, and I like to see more. I like to see more of people who just totally disagree.
Yeah.
Getting, I don't care for the politics particularly at all of Michelle Obama or George W. Bush, but the fact that they're kind of friendly is nice. It shows. I think it teaches a lesson that we can be civil. This is a nation of people we're a pretty closely politically divided nation. We disagree very strongly on fundamental issues, but we need to all live together and work together and prosper, and that involves getting along. And so those demonstrations of people having that is I think a good thing. Now that that can go too far, because you and we're not going to like shake Hitler's hand or something, but it is a good thing generally as standard practice.
It is, and I think it is a good reminder that very rambunctious debates don't have to take away personal civility. And just finally, Robbie, I would say fair credit to Vice President Harris. I've certainly had my criticisms of how she ran her election campaign. I thought she conducted herself through the sort of swearing in and the certification of Trump's election victory with, great dignity and civility, and I think that's a good thing.
Yes, I agree with that. Well, thank you so much for watching today. That does it for our show. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts, and we will see you back here tomorrow.